I didn't know what Slide 93 was until it showed up in a misdirected email from the CEO's girlfriend at midnight. And them. They didn't know I still had access to their internal systems, or that I knew exactly what it contained. A few weeks later, an $860 million deal collapsed due to an unspecified internal error. My name was never mentioned, but everyone knew who did it. My name is Avery Monroe, and at 38, I thought I'd seen every dirty trick the corporate world could throw at someone. I was wrong. The morning they fired me started like any other Tuesday at Claremont Strategic Partners. I arrived at 6:45 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to finalize the documentation for what would be the firm's crown jewel, an $860 million merger between Kinford Capital and Bellamy Aerospace. I'd spent 18 months on this deal, working 100-hour weeks, sacrificing weekends, missing my nephew's birthday parties. Every clause, every risk assessment, every regulatory compliance check bore my fingerprints. At 7 a.m. sharp, my phone buzzed, not my work phone, my personal one. The text was from Reed Wallace, our newly minted CEO. Need to see you in my office, now. Reed had been CEO for exactly 47 days. Before that, he'd been a mid-level account manager whose primary qualification seemed to be his ability to charm board members at country club dinners and, more recently, his relationship with Gia Moretti from PR, Gia, who'd somehow jumped from junior publicist to executive team member in the span of 3 months. I found Reed sitting behind his mahogany desk, not even pretending to look at the papers in front of him. Gia stood by the window, studying her manicure. "Avery," Reed began, his voice carrying that practiced smoothness of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "We need to talk about your future here." My future? I set down my coffee carefully. The Bellamy deal closes today. The Bellamy deal will be handled by the team going forward. He slid a manila folder across the desk. "We're letting you go, effective immediately." The words hit me like ice water. "Excuse me." "It's a cultural fit issue," Gia chimed in, her voice saccharine sweet. "The company is moving in a new direction." Cultural fit, after 12 years, after building half their legal framework from scratch, after saving them from 3 separate SEC investigations. "This is about the Jenkins report, isn't it?" I asked, because I flagged those inconsistencies in. "This isn't about any specific issue," Reed interrupted. "Security will escort you to collect your things. You have 15 minutes. I wanted to fight, to demand explanations, to remind them that I knew where every skeleton in Claremont's closet was buried, but I'd learned long ago that dignity in defeat often sets up victory later. I stood, took the folder without opening it, and walked out with my head high. Security gave me exactly 15 minutes. I packed methodically personal items only. They said, but they didn't notice the external drive tucked behind my family photos. The one where I'd been backing up my work for years, not company files. I'd never violate that trust. Just my personal notes, my analysis patterns, my templates, and, crucially, my correspondence with Bellamy's legal team about certain technical specifications they'd shared in confidence with me personally, not with Claremont. As I walked out of the building that had been my second home for over a decade, carrying a cardboard box like a cliché from a bad movie, I didn't know that in 16 hours and 42 minutes, Gia would make the mistake that would change everything. I didn't know about Slide 93 yet, but I did know this Reed Wallace had just made an enemy of someone who knew exactly how the game was played. And unlike him, I'd learned it the hard way. The email arrived at 11:42 p.m. I was sitting in my home office, a glass of wine untouched beside my laptop, scrolling through job listings with the mechanical determination of someone refusing to acknowledge defeat. The notification popped up on my personal email, the one still linked to Claremont's system, because IT had never properly removed my access when they'd switched platforms 6 months ago. From Gia Moretti to Avery Monroe. Subject FW confidential. Risk assessment revision urgent. My finger hovered over the delete button. I should have clicked it. Should have maintained the clean break. But something made me open it instead. The message was clearly meant for Reed. The body text was brief. "Baby, here's the updated deck. I removed what we discussed from Slide 93 like you asked. The clean version is ready for Bellamy tomorrow. Don't worry. I backed up the original just in case. Love you." Attached was a PowerPoint file, Bellamy Risk Assessment Internal V3.EX. My heart rate spiked. I'd created the original risk assessment. Every slide, every data point, every warning flag had been meticulously documented over months of due diligence. What could possibly need removing the night before closing? I downloaded the file, my hands trembling slightly. The presentation looked normal at first: corporate template, professional graphics, the standard legal language I'd perfected over the years. I clicked through slides on financial risk, market analysis, competitive landscape, regulatory compliance. Then I reached slide 93. Technical infrastructure security gap, critical. The slide detailed a fundamental flaw in Bellamy Aerospace's data encryption protocols. Not just any flaw, one that exposed proprietary defense technology to potential breaches, the kind of vulnerability that, if undisclosed during a merger, would constitute a material omission. If discovered post-merger, it would trigger SEC investigations, lawsuits, potentially criminal charges. I remembered flagging this issue 3 weeks ago. Reed had told me Bellamy was aware and had remediation plans in place, but this slide proved otherwise. The timestamp showed it had been added to the deck just yesterday, discovered during a final technical review. And tomorrow, they plan to present the clean version to Bellamy's board. Without slide 93, I sat back, the implications washing over me. This wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. Securities fraud, and Gia had just handed me the evidence on a silver platter. My phone buzzed, another email, this time from Gia's personal Gmail. OMG, wrong person. Avery, please delete that immediately. It was meant for Reed. Please confirm you've deleted it. This is really important. Then another, Avery, please respond. And another, I know you're probably asleep, but please delete that email first thing in the morning. It's confidential company property. I looked at the screen, at Gia's increasingly frantic messages, at slide 93 glowing accusingly in the darkness of my home office. I could delete it, pretend I never saw it, move on with my life. Or I could save it, screenshot every page, document the metadata, create backups of the backups. The wine sat untouched as I made my decision. I opened my secure cloud storage, created a new folder labeled Insurance, and began the methodical process of preserving every byte of data. By 1 a.m., I had everything saved in 3 different locations: the original email, the attachment, the timestamps, the metadata showing when the file had been created and modified, even Gia's panicked follow-ups, which themselves proved consciousness of guilt. I finally typed a response to Gia. Just saw this. Don't worry. I understand these things happen. Email deleted as requested. Good luck with the closing tomorrow. Then I archived her email, not deleted, just moved where she'd never think to look. As I finally poured that wine and took a long sip, I realized something had shifted. This morning, they'd held all the cards. They'd fired me, humiliated me, cast me aside like yesterday's trash. But now I held slide 93, and unlike Reed and Gia, I knew exactly what to do with it. The hardest part wasn't disappearing, it was resisting the urge to act immediately. For 2 weeks after my termination, I maintained complete radio silence. No LinkedIn updates announcing my departure, no bitter posts about corporate politics, no reaching out to former colleagues. I let the market wonder. In our incestuous little world of strategic consulting, silence speaks volumes. Instead, I focused on resurrection. Monroe Legal Advisory LLC was born in my living room on a Thursday afternoon, registered in Delaware with myself as sole proprietor. My website went live the following Monday, clean, professional, highlighting my expertise in compliance and risk assessment without mentioning Claremont once. The non-disclosure agreement they'd made me sign was airtight about client information and internal processes, but it said nothing about sharing general industry knowledge, best practices, or my own analytical frameworks developed over 12 years. Those belong to me. I started a blog. The Risk Nobody Sees posts about data security and mergers, the importance of technical due diligence, how overlooked IT vulnerabilities could derail billion-dollar deals. Each entry was carefully crafted, fully compliant with my NDA, citing only public sources and hypothetical scenarios that bore an uncanny resemblance to certain real-world situations. My third post, titled, When Material Omissions Become Material Disasters, garnered 12,000 views in 48 hours. I'd touched a nerve in the industry, discussing how undisclosed technical vulnerabilities discovered post-merger had tanked several high-profile deals in the past 5 years. No names, no specifics that could be traced to Claremont. Just thoughtful analysis backed by public SEC filings. The calls started coming by week 3. Not from Claremont clients, I was too careful for that, but from executives who'd read my blog, lawyers who'd heard through the grapevine that Avery Monroe was flying solo. 3 consulting contracts materialized within days. Small projects that kept me busy and, more importantly, visible. Meanwhile, the Bellamy deal had closed. I saw the announcement in the Wall Street Journal, complete with a photo of Reed shaking hands with Bellamy's CEO. $860 million, the largest acquisition in Claremont's history. Gia stood in the background of the photo, her smile as sharp as her ambition. I wondered if they'd deleted Slide 93 from their servers yet, if they'd scrubbed the trail clean, confident in their deception. They didn't know I was watching, didn't know that every blog post, every industry connection I cultivated, every speaking inquiry I fielded was building towards something larger. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Janet Rodriguez, a former Claremont analyst who'd left 6 months before my termination, reached out for coffee. We met at a quiet cafe in the financial district, and after the pleasantries, she leaned in. "I heard what happened," she said. "Reed's an ass. Half the team knows you built that place." I sipped my cappuccino carefully. "I'm focused on moving forward." "Sure," Janet smiled knowingly. "That's why your blog posts read like a roadmap of everything wrong with the Bellamy deal." My expression didn't change. "I write about industry trends, Janet, all public information." "Right." She slid a business card across the table. "My new boss at Kirkland Analytics would love to meet you. We're launching a new risk assessment division. Your expertise would be valuable." Kirkland Analytics, one of Bellamy Aerospace's preferred consulting firms for independent audits. "I'll think about it," I said, pocketing the card. That night, I published my most ambitious post yet, The Hidden Cost of Hidden Vulnerabilities, a framework for technical risk assessment in aerospace acquisitions. 4,000 words of meticulously researched analysis, complete with a downloadable framework template. A template that would reveal exactly the kind of vulnerability described in Slide 93, if anyone cared to apply it. The post went viral in our small community, LinkedIn shares, Twitter discussions, even a mention in an industry newsletter. My inbox flooded with inquiries. But I was waiting for one specific response, and at 9:15 p.m. the following Tuesday, it came. From David Park, Chief Risk Officer, Bellamy Aerospace subject, your recent article. Ms. Monroe, your recent publication raises some concerns that align with our ongoing integration efforts. Would you be available for a confidential consultation? I stared at the email, allowing myself a small smile. They were starting to question things, starting to wonder what might have been missed. I waited exactly 24 hours before responding, maintaining the illusion of a busy consultant's schedule. Mr. Park, I'd be happy to discuss how my framework might assist your integration process. Please note that I maintain strict confidentiality with all clients and cannot discuss any prior engagements. The hook was baited. Now I just had to wait for them to bite. The report took me 3 days to write. Not because the content was difficult, I could have drafted it in 3 hours, but because every word had to be perfect, legally bulletproof, ethically unassailable, devastating in its implications without pointing a single finger at any specific company. I titled it, Technical Infrastructure Vulnerabilities in Modern Aerospace Acquisitions, a Comparative Risk Analysis. Dry enough to avoid sensationalism, specific enough to catch the right attention. The report analyzed 5 anonymous case studies of aerospace mergers from the past decade, each one publicly documented in SEC filings, but presented with fresh analysis through my proprietary framework. Case study number 4 was particularly interesting, a hypothetical scenario where a target company's data encryption protocols contained a critical flaw that, if undisclosed during due diligence, could expose the acquiring company to regulatory penalties exceeding $1 billion. Purely hypothetical, of course. I submitted it to the Institute for Strategic Risk Assessment, where my former Columbia professor, Dr. Margaret Walsh, served on the editorial board. Margaret had always appreciated thorough work, and this was some of my best. "Avery," she called 2 days later. "This is exceptional. We'd like to feature it in our quarterly bulletin, but I have to ask, case study 4 seems remarkably detailed for a hypothetical." "All the best hypotheticals are grounded in possibility." "Margaret," I replied carefully, "the aerospace industry is particularly vulnerable to these oversights. The technical complexity often exceeds the expertise of traditional due diligence teams." I could hear her smile through the phone. "Well, it's certainly thought-provoking. We'll run it in the special edition going out to our premium subscribers next week." Premium subscribers that included every major private equity firm, the SEC's corporate finance division, and importantly, Bellamy Aerospace's board of directors. The same week, I launched Phase 2. I created an anonymized data room through a secure third-party platform, the kind whistleblowers use to share information with journalists. Inside, I uploaded a carefully curated selection of materials, my risk assessment framework, public SEC filings highlighting similar vulnerabilities, and a white paper on the legal implications of material omissions in merger agreements. Nothing from Claremont, nothing that violated my NDA, just educational materials that happened to paint a very specific picture for anyone connecting the dots. Then I sent the access link to 5 carefully chosen recipients, risk assessment professionals at major firms, who subscribed to industry newsletters and loved sharing interesting finds with their networks. The message was simple. Thought you might find this research compilation useful for your teams. Please share with anyone who might benefit from improved due diligence frameworks. By Friday afternoon, the link had been forwarded 47 times. I knew because I'd set up tracking. One of those forwards went to Jennifer Liu, Senior Vice President of Risk Management at Bellamy Aerospace. The first domino was falling. That weekend, I attended the Strategic Consulting Alliance's monthly mixer, my first public appearance since leaving Claremont. Heads turned when I walked in. The gossip mill had been churning, but nobody knew the real story. I worked the room strategically, dropping breadcrumbs. To the McKinsey team, "I'm focusing on technical due diligence frameworks now. Amazing how many deals have hidden IT vulnerabilities." To the Deloitte partners, "Just published a piece on aerospace acquisitions. The regulatory exposure some companies take on is staggering." By the third conversation, people were pulling up my report on their phones. Marcus Webb from Kirkland Analytics found me by the bar. "Avery, that case study 4 in your report, that's not really hypothetical, is it?" I met his gaze steadily. "Every example in that report is based on publicly available information. Marcus, I take my professional obligations seriously." "Of course," he lowered his voice, "but if someone wanted to verify whether their recent acquisition might have similar vulnerabilities, how would you suggest they proceed?" "I'd suggest they conduct an independent technical audit using a framework designed to catch commonly overlooked issues, the kind of framework I've made publicly available." His eyes sharpened. "And if they discovered something concerning, then they'd have a fiduciary duty to investigate fully. Material omissions in merger documentation aren't just civil matters. Marcus, the SEC takes them very seriously." He nodded slowly. "I'll pass that along to interested parties." As I left the mixer, my phone buzzed with new LinkedIn connections, consultation requests, and one particularly interesting email from a Wall Street Journal reporter asking for comment on emerging trends in merger-related fraud. I declined the interview, of course, but I did send her a link to my anonymized data room, noting that it contained some fascinating research on the topic. The second domino tipped forward. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The analytics on my blog showed 1,200 views on the aerospace vulnerabilities post in the last 6 hours. The shares were climbing exponentially. Somewhere in Claremont's gleaming offices, Reed and Gia were probably celebrating their successful quarter, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. They thought they'd buried Slide 93. They had no idea I was about to resurrect it. The unraveling began on a Tuesday morning at 10:17 a.m. I was reviewing a client contract when my phone lit up with notifications. 3 text messages from former colleagues, 2 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and a dozen LinkedIn alerts. Something had happened. I opened the Wall Street Journal app first. The headline made my coffee cup pause halfway to my lips. Bellamy Aerospace requests full documentation review of Kinford acquisition. The article was brief but damning. Sources inside Bellamy confirmed that senior leadership had ordered a complete re-examination of all due diligence materials following internal concerns about potential undisclosed vulnerabilities. The stock price had already dropped 4% in pre-market trading. My phone rang. Janet Rodriguez. Holy shit. Avery, did you see? I saw. My boss at Kirkland just got called into an emergency meeting. Bellamy wants an independent audit. They specifically asked for someone with expertise in technical infrastructure vulnerabilities. She paused. Your blog post is being forwarded everywhere. I kept my voice neutral. It's important that companies take these risks seriously. Right. Her tone suggested she wasn't buying my innocence act. Well, thought you should know. This is about to get messy. The next call came from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. Ms. Monroe, this is Sarah Winters from Bloomberg. We're working on a story about the Bellamy-Kinford deal and would love your perspective on technical due diligence failures. I deleted it, then deleted the next 4 similar messages. By noon, the situation had escalated. A leaked internal memo from Bellamy, how these things always manage to leak at just the right moment, revealed that they'd discovered significant discrepancies between the risk assessment provided during negotiations and their current technical audit findings. The memo didn't mention slide 93. It didn't have to. At 2:45 p.m., my former assistant at Claremont texted me, Reed's in full panic mode. He's been locked in the conference room with legal all morning. Gia's been crying in the bathroom. I didn't respond, but I did allow myself a moment of satisfaction. The next phase happened faster than even I had anticipated. By Thursday, Bellamy had formally requested all original documentation from Claremont, including unedited versions of risk assessments and all internal communications related to the deal. That's when things got interesting. According to my network, and I still had an excellent network, Reed claimed a server malfunction had corrupted some files. The original risk assessment, he insisted, was exactly what had been presented. Any suggestion of removed or edited content was simply a misunderstanding. But Gia had made a crucial mistake. In her panic to cover their tracks, she'd forgotten about the automatic cloud backup linked to her personal Google account, the same account she'd used to send me that fateful email. Bellamy's legal team, now in full investigation mode, subpoenaed all electronic communications, and there it was, the original email thread between Reed and Gia, discussing the removal of slide 93 timestamped the night before the deal closed. Friday brought the inevitable. Bellamy formally suspended the acquisition pending a full investigation. $860 million, frozen. The SEC announced they were monitoring the situation with interest. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters, industry colleagues, potential clients who suddenly very much wanted my expertise in technical due diligence. I ignored them all, maintaining my professional silence. But that evening, I received one call I did answer. David Park from Bellamy. Ms. Monroe. His voice was carefully controlled. I wanted to thank you for your recent publication on technical vulnerabilities. It prompted us to look more carefully at our recent acquisition. I'm glad you found it useful. Mr. Park, thorough due diligence is critical in aerospace acquisitions. Indeed. He paused. We may have some consulting needs in the near future. Would you be available? I maintain a strict policy about conflicts of interest. Mr. Park, given the current situation, I couldn't consult on any matters related to the Kinford acquisition. Of course not. But perhaps other matters, future acquisitions, where we want to ensure nothing like this happens again. That, I said, would be a different conversation entirely. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of champagne, not to celebrate, that would come later, but to mark the moment when the house of cards began its inevitable collapse. Somewhere across town, Reed was probably on his 3rd emergency conference call of the day, trying to explain how a critical security vulnerability had somehow vanished from their risk assessment. Gia was likely updating her resume, knowing her Google account had become evidence in a federal investigation. And slide 93. It was about to become the most famous slide in merger history, the one that disappeared and then reappeared at exactly the wrong moment. I raised my glass to the empty room. To transparency, I said quietly, and to keeping good records. The champagne tasted like vindication. The death blow came dressed in Armani suits and carrying subpoenas. It started with Kinford Capital's emergency board meeting on Monday morning. According to my sources, and by now, everyone wanted to be my source. The institutional investors were beyond furious. $860 million in limbo, their stock price hemorrhaging value, and no clear answers from Claremont about how a critical security vulnerability had been omitted from the final risk assessment. By Tuesday afternoon, Gia Moretti was no longer with the company. The official statement cited personnel restructuring, but the security footage of her being escorted out with boxes told a different story. Someone had leaked that her personal email contained evidence of intentional document tampering. The SEC had copies of everything. Reed lasted another 48 hours. He tried to weather the storm, calling emergency all-hands meetings, promising full cooperation with investigators. But when Kinford's lawyers presented evidence that he'd personally instructed the removal of critical risk data evidence sourced from Gia's cloud backups, even his board allies couldn't protect him. The resignation announcement came at 4:30 p.m. on Thursday. Effective immediately, no severance package, potential criminal charges pending. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor at my home office. Margaret Walsh, my former professor and current board member at the Institute for Strategic Risk Assessment. "Avery," she said, settling into my guest chair with the gravity of someone about to have a significant conversation, "we need to talk about your future." I offered her tea, which she declined. "What about my future?" "An independent legal panel is being assembled to investigate the Claremont-Bellamy fiasco. The SEC wants outside expertise, people with no connections to either firm." She studied me carefully. "Your name has been suggested." "I have a clear conflict of interest. I was terminated by Claremont." "Which is exactly why you're perfect." Margaret leaned forward. "You have the expertise. You understand the technical aspects, and your recent termination actually makes you more credible. You have no reason to protect them. Plus, your published work on this exact type of vulnerability makes you the obvious expert." I set down my own tea carefully. "They want me to investigate my former employer. They want you to provide expert testimony on industry standards for technical due diligence, whether certain omissions would constitute material misrepresentation, whether a reasonable professional would have flagged these issues." She smiled slightly. "All things you've already written about extensively." "I'd need guarantees, full immunity from any NDA violations when discussing relevant information, protection from retaliation." "Already arranged. The SEC is very interested in your expertise. Avery, they've read your blog." I thought about slide 93 sitting encrypted in my secure files. Evidence I'd never have to produce, because they'd find their own copies soon enough. The beauty of letting others discover what you already knew. "I'll need everything in writing," I said finally. "Of course. Oh, and Avery," Margaret stood to leave. "Bellamy Aerospace is also restructuring their risk management team. David Park mentioned they're looking for a new chief legal strategy officer, someone with experience in technical due diligence who can ensure this never happens again. The compensation is substantial." After she left, I sat in my office as darkness fell over the city. In 6 weeks, I'd gone from terminated employee to the most sought-after expert in technical merger risks. My blog had become required reading at major firms. My framework was being adopted as an industry standard. And Reed Wallace, he was about to become the poster child for corporate fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Gia. I know you have the original email I sent you. If you're going to share it with investigators, please just tell me first. I have a daughter. I need to prepare." I stared at the message for a long moment. Gia, who'd stood by while they fired me, who'd smiled her sharp smile and talked about cultural fit, who'd carelessly destroyed her own career with a single misdirected email. I typed back, "I've already told investigators I deleted your email as requested. I have no records of receiving any misdirected communications from you." It was true. I'd never share that email. I didn't need to. She'd created enough evidence on her own to bury herself. The cloud backups, the internal communications, The metadata trails all of it discovered through proper channels by Bellamy's investigation. I'd simply lit the match. She'd built the bonfire herself. My phone rang. David Park from Bellamy. Ms. Monroe, I'm calling about the position Margaret mentioned. We'd like to move quickly on this. Can you start Monday? I'll need to review the terms, I said, already knowing I'd accept. And I have some conditions regarding the scope of the role. Whatever you need, we want someone who can ensure this never happens again, someone who understands both the technical and legal complexities, someone with unquestionable integrity. Integrity. I almost smiled at the word. Send me the offer, I said. Let's discuss the details tomorrow. As I hung up, I thought about the journey from that morning in Reed's office to this moment. Fired at 7 a.m., vindicated in 6 weeks. Soon to be returning to the industry in a role more powerful than anything I'd had at Claremont. The $860 million deal was dead. Reed and Gia were facing federal investigation. Claremont's reputation was in ruins. And me, I was about to help rebuild the industry's entire approach to technical due diligence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well. It's making sure the system that wronged you can never wrong anyone else the same way again. The congressional hearing room was smaller than it appeared on television, but no less intimidating. Wood paneling, flags, and the weight of federal authority filled the space. I sat at the witness table, my hands folded calmly over my prepared testimony, as cameras clicked and reporters whispered in the gallery behind me. It was 9:05 a.m. on a Wednesday, exactly 11 weeks after my termination from Claremont. Ms. Monroe, Senator Patricia Hayes began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd chaired dozens of these hearings. You've been called here today as an expert witness in the matter of securities fraud related to the failed Bellamy-Kinford acquisition. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Please state your qualifications for the record. I leaned toward the microphone. I have 12 years of experience in merger and acquisition law. Specializing in technical due diligence and risk assessment, I've published extensively on infrastructure vulnerabilities in aerospace acquisitions. Until recently, I served as senior legal strategist at Claremont Strategic Partners. And you were terminated from that position shortly before the Bellamy acquisition closed. That's correct. I was terminated without cause on the morning the deal was set to close. Senator Hayes shuffled her papers. Ms. Monroe, without discussing any confidential information from your time at Claremont, can you explain to this committee what standard industry practice would be for handling the discovery of a critical security vulnerability during due diligence? This was my moment, not to accuse, not to point fingers, but to lay out facts so clearly that the conclusion would be inevitable. Standard practice is unambiguous, I began. Any material risk that could affect the value or legal standing of an acquisition must be fully disclosed to all parties. This is not just best practice, it's federal law under SEC regulations. And if such a risk were discovered but not disclosed, that would constitute securities fraud. It would expose both the acquiring and advisory firms to civil penalties, criminal charges, and shareholder lawsuits. In your expert opinion, would a data encryption vulnerability that exposed proprietary defense technology be considered material? I met her gaze steadily. Absolutely. Such a vulnerability could result in regulatory fines exceeding $1 billion, loss of defense contracts, and potential national security implications. It would be impossible for any competent professional to view this as immaterial. The questions continued for 2 hours. I answered each one precisely, professionally, never once mentioning Reed or Gia by name. I didn't need to. The committee had the documents, the emails, the evidence trail that led inexorably to one conclusion.